So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the EOcafe, where the EO community meet. Today, we're going to learn more about the wind energy sector and what EO can do to serve it. Just a reminder of the rules to start off with. Please keep your microphones muted until or unless I ask you to join us. But feel free to use your camera. It's always good to see people. So you can leave your camera on if you don't mind us seeing what you're doing as well. Then if you have questions, please pop them into the chat, and we can see them coming. But if we take the question, then I'll ask you to pose it directly, and open your microphone and join us. So those are the basic rules. If we do ask you, then just introduce yourself, and let's get going. So 2010, I think it was, ESA organized a workshop with the oil and gas industry. And it was well attended. It was very well appreciated. And this led to the first series of projects, which have now become known as the Best Practices projects. The overall goal of the projects is to understand what are the challenges facing a particular sector, what the possible solutions are using Earth observation data, what the challenges are to getting that in place to solve the problem or contribute to solving the problem. And the methodology that was developed in the early oil and gas sector has largely been reproduced in subsequent best practice projects. So starting from that links with the oil and gas sector in 2011, 2012, ESA has established a series of best practice studies. We've had 3 previously in the EOcafe. So we've looked at agri-insurance, we've looked at raw materials, and we've looked at Baltic and Arctic shipping. So this is the 4th EOcafe dedicated to a conversation around the best practices project. And as we've said, this time we're talking about wind energy. So the project is EO for wind. We'll hear more about that as we go on, identifying the key needs of the onshore and offshore wind energy stakeholders. What are the barriers for the uptake of EO data, and the sort of methodology that I've taught. And to help us understand this, we've got two of the leaders of the project team, Sinead McGlynn and Connor Doyle, both from TechWorks Marine. And as usual, let me ask you just to introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background and how you are where you are. Sinead?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So hi, everybody. My name is Sinead. I'm the COO at TechWorks Marine. We're a marine data company based in Dublin in Ireland. We've been working with the European Space Agency on projects since about 2009 or thereabouts. I've been with the company since 2018, and I actually came into the company initially as the Earth observation lead. So I started off in that area and then kind of moved through the company. But my background is in physics, in astrophysics, actually, originally. So a little bit different, I think, but it's relatively common, I think, for people who are looking out at the stars to kind of turn around and focus their gaze back on Earth again using satellites. So that's how I started, I suppose, in this area. Our company is a bit of a mix in that we provide a lot of operational in situ data. So we deploy buoys or we deploy equipment in the water to collect real-time data. But we also have a thriving research team where we're trying to integrate the usage of Earth observation satellite data with the in situ data. So we've done a lot of projects in the last few years, last 10 years maybe, around calibration and validation of satellite data, about intercomparisons, how you can use satellite data. Even though we're a marine company and a lot of our operational work is around marine, we've looked at different elements of EO, so looking at wildfires, looking at wastewater escaping into the coastal areas, so looking at how E. coli affects the waters, looking at all sorts of different elements. And part of that, then a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is around the offshore wind area. So this was really of interest to us in terms of the on and offshore, because we already had quite a good, well-established relationship with a lot of developers in the offshore areas. And it was an opportunity for us to learn more about the onshore elements as well. And I think Connor has done a lot of work around the onshore side in particular. Our team, which Connor is one, we like to just try and understand the kind of the requirements that the industry has, and that's part of why we started this project.
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might pass over now to Connor now and let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Shona. Connor? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Earth observation scientist at TechWorks Marine as well. I did a master's, finished last year in space science and technology, and I joined TechWorks Marine just over a year now. So I did my internship, my 3-month internship for the master's at TechWorks. And then I've stayed on since. And that project was kind of piggybacking onto this best practices project. So I did basically a site selection map for onshore wind farms in Ireland, and using a number of different parameters, mostly EO, to sort of pick out where the good spots and like areas that are kind of untapped potential. My background before that is actually kind of in nanotech, so I kind of did a little bit of a career change. But I've always had an interest in space and like geography and environmental stuff, environmental protection. So I've kind of found my way into Earth observation now, which is kind of a lovely mix of all those.
Seems to fit very well.
Yeah, definitely. It's very niche, but I didn't not really heard of it before I started the masters, and
well done for finding the sector.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
TechWorks Marine are very happy about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. So we're going to talk about the wind energy sector. Wind energy is becoming such an important part of the energy mix for really all countries now. So it's a sector developing very fast, and is considered to be only second to the solar sector in the importance for the energy mix. There are a lot of potential areas for the use of EO, which we'll hear about, and a lot of challenges facing the sector, and a sector that's evolving, which we'll also hear about. So there's a number of challenges. One of the things I'm come across recently, intrigued to learn about more, is this concept of wind theft, and how it's a theft. And anyway, we'll talk more about that. But let's start by sort of digging into the wind energy sector, and tell us more about the wind energy sector and the challenges that it faces. Sinead, I guess that falls in your court.
Sure.
But please feel free to jump in, Connor, or to answer as you wish.
Yeah, I think so. At the beginning of the project, we did quite a detailed just analysis and breakdown in terms of the different business processes that you have kind of within the various parts of the sector, and there's a lot of overlap, obviously, between the on and offshore wind, because your first, I suppose the first step is to evaluate the potential sites for, first of all, suitability, and also then just to evaluate the amount of wind that you're likely to generate, and therefore the amount of power you're expected to get. We found, speaking to a lot of developers, at kind of events like Wind Energy Europe and these kind of things,
Mm.
which was a really nice, useful way of kind of just getting different opinions from different people. We found there were, kind of, I suppose, barriers in some places that were, across the board, and barriers in some that were very kind of specific to those, specific countries. In general, like, we obviously have quite a lot of inside knowledge on the Irish sector, and so there's quite a strong onshore presence, a very little offshore. And there's been a couple of big developments within the sector in the last couple of years, with the Irish government basically implementing a plan-led approach to try and resolve issues that they had observed in other countries. It has slowed things down quite a lot within Ireland, in particular, because just, I suppose, the government essentially didn't want there to be kind of a free-for-all for developers everywhere to just be able to take land and put wind farms in there. What we found in a lot of places, so we spoke to people from Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK, Norway. There's a lot of still issues around, kind of the supply chain, especially since COVID. So there's a huge amount of risk that is built into the industry, and the industry is very risk averse. So a lot of the developers would have come from the oil and gas sector, would have the same sort of standardized practices, and would be very, risk averse. What we found, I think, in a lot of places is either political barriers of various sorts. So either, planning barriers, or, lobbying from other sectors, trying to, I suppose, or just holding back the progress in the wind sector.
The planning is a real issue then.
Yeah, and it seems to be kind of, across the board nearly, there's either, planning or what would you call, I suppose, like, bureaucracy of some type is in place and is holding back development in a lot of places. You've also then got, I think in the UK possibly there's been issues around, kind of developers going in with fixed pricing, and then realizing that actually, with the cost of everything increasing so rapidly, it's no longer a viable option. And then, as you mentioned with wind speed there, you've also got places where, in particular offshore, there are farms that are built quite close to each other, and suddenly they're realizing that there's an issue where, maybe the wind speed is not distributed evenly across the entire set of farms. So you've got an issue where one farm is affecting the other one. And that's also then potentially environmental issues, where the different wind farms could be affecting each other environmentally as well. Maybe, Conor, do you want to talk a little bit about the wind theft as a kind of an example?
Yeah, so one of the products that we're developing is basically looking at this wind theft, or the wake effect, as it's called. And we're looking at an area off the coast of Belgium. So what you have there basically is you've a number of wind farms offshore that are all kind of in this little zone, and you'll see that they're all built, not that long apart. And I think it's only something that the industry has only kind of woken up to recently, where there was not really, when all this planning and construction was all going on, they didn't seem to be aware of this. But now it's kind of something it's come out, and now people are starting to panic about it. So you'll see the wind will go in one direction, and the first wind farm that's on like the outside of this area is getting like that full potential of the wind speed. And then as it passes through that first wind farm, the wind speed is reduced. So the wind farm that is kind of built next to that then is getting less speed than the first one. And then the next one has even less again. And so by the time you could have, I think there's about maybe let's say like 8 wind farms all built side by side and different owners of each of these. By the time you get to the very last one, it's gone through all of these wind farms, and now you've got a much lower wind speed than you would have thought in the planning. Because obviously when the construction and all this planning that went into it, they would have done estimates and yields of electricity that they would have expected to get. And now that they've realized that this is going to be significantly less, there's going to be a lot of money lost because of that. But like now they're thinking like, what can we do about it? Like, the wind is significantly from one direction. So almost always it's going to be going through all of these wind farms. So the big thing is, I guess, not to make mistakes again if they're doing another one, or at what stage do you decommission it? Like, how many losses are you going to get? So it's really something that the industry has just it's kind of just like blown it open recently, and now a lot of companies are kind of freaking out about it.
Well, wind theft is sort of quite a nice emotive term, isn't it? Which can be used.
Yeah.
So I mean that's one of the challenges facing the sector, which is a new challenge which wasn't anticipated. What other challenges face the sector, and where is Earth observation relevant to the sector?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we encountered when we started speaking about EO to the various companies was there's awareness of the fact that EO data exists, and in some parts and not in others, there maybe wasn't a huge amount of awareness that EO data is probably included in a lot of the analysis, not the data that the developers, for example, are already using. So they would be more familiar with just, looking at kind of more detailed models, but the models are incorporating EO data a lot of the time. So, they were familiar, I think, with, the Copernicus services, or familiar with, other very bespoke products which integrated EO data. And there are companies out there that are providing products directly from EO. Part of the issue, though, is because a lot of the sector is coming from the oil and gas sector, you've got the same kind of restrictions around. It's very tightly regulated. You have very stringent requirements around data sourcing, I would say, I suppose, and we've encountered this as well in our kind of in our operational side as well in the company. You have to really make sure the data is very well validated, and maybe the resolution of the EO data that they're interested in isn't high enough for their purposes, or maybe there's some of the metadata is missing or something like that, or there's not enough information. So that was kind of one of the biggest challenge. Well, two biggest challenges was either not really being aware of EO data, or if they've got awareness of EO data, sometimes they've already excluded it from their processes for various reasons.
So just to add to that, yeah, I think of the 6 business challenges, the wind resource, that's the biggest one, where it has to be really exact. And so a lot of those companies will turn to LiDAR because it is the highest resolution you can get compared to the EO. And I think then for onshore sites, definitely they have to have measurements for at least a year with like a meteorological mast. So they put that up so that they can have a look at like seasonal changes and everything. So they won't use EO exclusively, and I think companies that want LiDAR will just avoid it. Whereas the EO still has, it's easily accessible and you can, free to access. So it can still be useful in like the early planning, but a lot of those companies will still avoid it, even if they're aware of it.
Avoid it because they have other sources. There's no.
Yeah, I think of people that were a bit sort of like reluctant to use it or like dismissive of it. I think they had their other sources, and they're even if they're using models, they will just ignore it as a potential source.
So okay. So where is the EO data being used in the sector?
So there's a few different places. I'd say for the onshore, like digital elevation models, looking at like the terrain would be one. I think again, like land use, land classification. So if you're looking for, type of ground to build on, that would be very useful as like an early indicator. You can like rule out areas quickly. And the same again for offshore for the seafloor classification and bathymetry as well. Then maybe like flood extent as well.
Okay, yeah.
With SAR, and I suppose, and what we're trying to develop now as well, like a landslide risk model, so that you can look at areas where potentially landslides have or are likely to occur, so that you can either avoid that when building it, or you're aware of it so that it could potentially destroy or at least damage sites. So there's definitely uses there for it, but I think a lot of them could either can be developed on, or there could be more added to it.
And is there any use of ground movement interferometry? Is that not sufficiently considered not sufficiently important risk?
No, I think it is a risk, and I think the there's the INSAR ground motion.
Yeah.
So we're kind of taking that and trying to develop something on top of it, like have it better. But they have sort of like traffic light system where they'll have like green as being like a very low risk, and they haven't seen like very little movement, and then red will be the highest amount of movement. And you can see like over time how much the ground has either sank or risen. So we're going to develop INSAR to add to that then, to make it probably hopefully a bit more detailed.
It seems a fairly low-hanging fruit to avert what could be a significant risk.
Yeah, I think for onshore it's a no-brainer. Like it has to be one of the highest concerns.
Yeah. Tell us a little about the sector. How's the wind energy sector structured? Is it all large companies? Are they financial companies? Are they engineering companies? Are there a lot of small players? What's the sector look like?
So what we've seen, I think, is generally you've got quite a few large players who are working in kind of multiple areas across the world. Excuse me. We've seen companies like, I think, for example, Parkwind was bought by a very large Japanese company, or a couple of I think last year. Companies like Ørsted or other large. There's a lot of very large ones who are working in several different areas. We've in kind of a local, I suppose, context. RWE, who are extremely large company, have just recently officially opened their offices in Dublin, because they're going to have a site, they hope, off the East Coast in a few years. And they, I think, they're one of the largest companies operating, but they're very keen to get a foothold in Ireland, as we're at the kind of the nascent stage, I suppose, of offshore wind. So in general, the companies, they're quite what's the word? Yeah, like they're obviously very focused on kind of regulations, very risk averse, very focused on making sure that everything, especially the kind of preliminary stages, is well thought out, well thought through, and well designed. And a lot of the initial data which EO can provide in terms of baseline monitoring, I think, could be very useful for that.
So the operator is involved in the process right from the very beginning. It's a sort of a build and operate operation.
Yeah, exactly. And so like there's a lot of scope as well during the kind of the operations and maintenance stage, again around kind of baseline monitoring using EO. You know, we could kind of, I think we identified, I'm trying to think now, I'm not going to say it off the top of my head, but I think we looked at maybe, there's maybe kind of 15 different products which are at kind of a commercial stage.
Right.
So, you know, usable by large organizations, where there's a demand as well. There's, you know, and then kind of going back further to kind of, you know, pre-commercial or R&D stage, there are more, you know, what's the word? There are more gaps, I suppose, in the product requirements. And that kind of comes back again to probably things like the you know, the temporal resolution or the spatial resolution. So I think, you know, having more satellites, you know, and a continuous supply of satellite data will kind of close those gaps a little bit and actually provide more interest to the companies too.
So do you see particularly the larger companies insourcing the supply of EO services, or are they still turning to specialists like yourselves to provide the data?
I think it kind of depends. So yeah, a lot of them are. So you'd have, there are probably a lot of, say, for example, on the offshore side, there'd be kind of met-ocean specialists who would be interested in kind of, building in the capacity within the company. But there's a lot of companies that would just be interested in just outsourcing and just getting the products in directly, because they don't necessarily have the capacity in-house to build it up.
Okay. I mean, I think we see AI as having maybe quite an influence in this area. How are you finding integrating AI into your work?
Well, we've kind of
Sorry, taking a slightly different turn.
yeah. We just kind of started. So we've done a few kind of small scale projects over the last few years, looking at, you know, trying more kind of around the predictability using AI. And we have a person in the house now who's just started with us this year, who's looking at machine learning for harmful algal blooms, and she's a postdoc from the computer science background. So what we're hoping is that she'll teach us more about effective uses of machine learning, and we'll teach her about the marine environment, so that there's an upskilling on both sides. I mean, I think there's a lot of scope there. And I don't have a huge amount of knowledge of it myself, but I think just even being able to use the EO data as training data for models and building in the predictions and that kind of thing is going to be massive in a few years.
Okay. I don't know. Do you want to? I sort of skipped over this at the beginning. I introduced the best practices projects. Do you want to say a little bit about the project and how that's worked? How you found the methodology, whether that has been successful in terms of the wind energy sector, or whether there are new things you found out?
Yeah, I suppose so some kind of things that have worked for us and some things that aren't. We were looking initially, so obviously at the beginning the first step was kind of a, you know, scoping exercise, kind of state of the art. What is it that is out there? What kind of data is available? and what are the end users looking for, and how do you merge those two together? So where are the gaps?
Mhm.
And a lot of what we learned initially was just trying to engage with the developers and try and get their feedback. So it's kind of straightforward enough to set up surveys and send it out to people, but a lot of the time I think people were just totally surveyed out and just overwhelmed. So actually getting out to speak to people and nearly,
Yeah.
pigeonholing them at conferences or at events, or showing up at their offices virtually or in real life was a much better way of getting information. And just even then getting the I suppose getting the interest. So we've got 3 different organizations who are interested in testing out our products, and they're kind of the ones that we had the most kind of beneficial interactions with. So that was a big element, I think, on our side.
Yeah.
Yeah, those meetings we had with the companies, I think even if it was a short meeting, like 20, 30 minutes, I mean, the amount of knowledge and like information you get from them rather than the surveys, people are bogged down, tired at the end of conference. And, I think that the last thing they want to do is fill out a long survey. So those meetings we found were really useful.
Yeah, I'm sure. We had the similar experiences. Emmanuel, you asked a question about sort of insourcing. I don't know if we answered your question with my question, or the answer to my question, but you've also got a question about the solar sector. Do you want to come in and explain?
Yes, good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Barely, but yes, we hear you.
Barely. Yeah, I'm living in a
That's better.
developing country regarding telecommunication, Germany. Yeah, I'm discussing with a number of stakeholders related to solar energy, and they are heavily dependent on weather forecast. As soon as you have one cloud over a large PV footprint, it could become a nightmare for them because therefore the production is falling down and it could provoke a number of technical issues. Is it the same in the wind energy sector, or the production is a bit different, therefore you're less dependent on the weather? I don't have any idea, so it's a super open question. I was just noticing this real problem regarding weather forecast and real-time weather data for PV guys. And is it the same for wind or not at all? Thanks.
I think I think you're nearly always going to get more consistent wind than solar in a lot of locations, particularly offshore. You're going to get nearly fairly kind of consistent wind, because just from our own experience, even with having equipment and buoys out on site, we use a combination of solar and wind power, because like you say, if you're going to have issues around solar power, but you're nearly always going to have a consistent wind blowing. And I think for onshore, I'm not sure so much because I don't have as much experience in that, but I know particularly in Ireland, for example, a lot of the onshore sites are built on land which wouldn't be used otherwise, and that's not always the case everywhere. So I know, for example, in Germany and places like that, there are large wind farms that are just built over big kind of flat areas. In Ireland, a lot of our wind farms are built on hilly areas, so you're always again going to have some wind. Where we see a real need for the weather requirements is during the operations and maintenance stage for for offshore wind farms, because they need to understand the workability windows, which is again very applicable for us as well. They need to be able to understand if there is an issue during operations, how likely are you to be able to get out to site to fix the problem. And that's more where the weather focus is on the offshore side. On the onshore, I think it's more just a case of, weather data is used to kind of predict the amount of power you're likely to generate. But definitely for offshore, it's all around access to site and how likely it is. During the winter periods, you may have times where you can't get onto a site, for a month. And how do you work around that?
Yeah, and so just to add to that as well, like Ireland has massive offshore wind potential. Like it's one of the highest in Europe, but we only have one actual operating offshore wind farm, and the West Coast has like insane wind speeds. But then the issue is the currents and getting out, like building them and then having people out to operate them as well. So that's a reason why there's none that actually currently exists over there now.
Yeah, you basically have a trade-off between wind potential versus accessibility.
I mean, certainly the impression is that there's more variability in wind than in solar. For onshore, maybe, but I mean, even offshore, though, I would have expected quite some variations. But you say that's not the case; it's fairly stable. Is that just for Ireland, or that apply to other countries as well?
In our experience, yeah, it's applied in other countries as well. So I guess maybe, I don't know, yeah, maybe in the Mediterranean or somewhere where it's quite sheltered, yeah, you're going to have probably less, but anywhere kind of the Atlantic coast, off the coast of Scandinavia and like that, and I guess that's part of the reason why, countries like Norway and the UK have so many kind of wind farms, is because you've got, yeah, a fairly consistent source of power around those areas.
Yeah. Okay. What are the major trends in the sector, and especially those where you may have a relevance? How's the sector changing? I mean, capacity sounds sort of a first obvious element. If you're saying there's only one wind farm off the coast of Ireland, then there must be enormous potential for putting more. Planning, I guess, is the main issue, even offshore. So what are the trends in the sector?
Well, I think there's an increasing trade-off between every country's kind of climate change requirements and the amount of I suppose renewable energy that needs to be produced. From an Irish perspective, yeah, we're offshore wind would go a long way towards helping us to meet our targets, and it's right now it's just it's not the case. But yeah, I think in terms of capacity and even just in terms of scaling, I know there's the actual turbines themselves are getting larger and larger. So you get, in the end, you're going to have fewer turbines required in one site to produce the same amount of power. But again, the trade-off from that then is, again, local opposition, or even just then actual vessels who have the capacity to actually bring the turbines out to the site and assemble them. That's something we've come across just in discussions with various other kind of parts of the sector. You've got turbines getting bigger and bigger, but then the vessels also have to scale bigger and bigger, and by the time the vessel has been built and is ready to go to sea, the turbine has gone bigger again. So it's sort of a catch-up game. I mean, I think across Europe, it's wind energy and renewable energy in general is is a huge element, going from, the EU's Green Deal and Blue Deal, all of the European countries in particular are going to have to scale up. But I'm not going to talk about across the water in the US, I think, where they have possibly the opposite problem at the moment.
Yeah, great uncertainty. So where should EO companies be looking? Where should they be thinking of investing or being more active?
I think there's definitely kind of, low-hanging fruit in terms of existing products, like Emmanuel mentioned, excuse me, earlier on with the INSAR and stuff like that. I think there's a certain amount of what we found anyway was that there's a certain amount of education or kind of knowledge sharing with companies within the sector who are, as Connor said, like some of them are maybe a bit dismissive initially, but if you kind of show them an example of something or say, well, actually, you can do this, even if it's a different application, they can immediately see, oh, well, actually, that is applicable to us. And that's what the guys came across, I think, a couple of times where said, oh, well, actually, Connor was looking at coastal erosion and coastal change, and actually turbidity from satellites is a huge element around that, and just being able to I suppose kind of give you an indication of areas where you are likely to get kind of erosion and accretion, and that's something that maybe the developers of the companies hadn't necessarily thought about. So it's just there's an educational piece to it, definitely. But I think the main thing is, a lot of the times, a picture tells a thousand words, and if you can show, something that's actually that the stakeholder can immediately say, oh, well, actually, yes, that's really useful. That could be a benefit to us. Then that's the kind of key. I mean, I think just, kind of going out there, making yourself known, just trying to engage with within the sector. I think what we found is we spoke to a lot of the technical people who had an interest, but obviously it's the commercial element of the company that will, provide a budget or provide the procurement for services. So you get the technical people invested and on board, and then they can be kind of the champion for you within the company.
Yeah, that's a familiar story. Has anyone else got any questions they want to pose? I need somebody to ask questions so I can just pop and deal with my dog who's complaining. Is a bit distracting. So any further questions, let me know. The results of the project will be published, I presume. So there will be a website, or as in the previous best practices, there'll be a sort of matrix of challenges and solutions and.
Yeah, we have some of the information already up on the ERSC portal, and then we have a site ourselves as well, which Connor can put into the chat, which has has some details around the challenges, and then the different let's say EO products that can address those challenges, and also a bit of information for the kind of the developers themselves. There's a bit of information on the websites about the satellites and the kind of the availability, the data that's there at the moment. We're 3/4 of the way to the project, I think. So we're working now at this stage just to try and use the kind of products or the proofs that we've developed. We're putting them onto the Cerulean Information Factory, which is run by PolarView and EOX, who I think possibly had a hand in the Baltic and Arctic. Oh no, sorry, it was DNV, I think, had a hand in the Baltic and Arctic EO best practices. But these kind of information factories, giant platforms, are really useful in terms of just saying, okay, this is the scope of all of the different services, no matter what your kind of area of interest is in. And the cerulean one is focused quite a lot about northern climes, kind of sea ice and things like that. But one of their kind of focus areas is in energy as well. So we're going to put a couple of products up there and allow our stakeholders just to test them and to give us some feedback. So that will then kind of feed into a roadmap for the final stage of the project, suggestions as to how can you can increase the EO uptake within the sector.
Okay, good. Emmanuel, you've jumped in. Thank you. Please.
Yes. I'd like to come back to the INSAR monitoring because you were mentioning it as a low-hanging fruit. Are you doing it yourself internally, or are you looking for a third party providing you the INSAR monitoring service, which is a highly skilled service? So in-house or make or buy, basically.
No, I believe it's all been done here. We have we have the three products. So we have the coastal change monitoring, we have the landslide risk, which is the INSAR, and then we have the wake effect. So the wake effect and the coastal change monitoring are at the point now where we've sent them off and they've been Dockerized. So we're waiting for feedback on those to kind of make adjustments. But the landslide one is sort of still is the least developed one at the moment. But it will be done all in-house.
I mean, the idea, I suppose, for these products is that they are they're going to be there as a proof of concept for looking at a specific area, to kind of demonstrate to the stakeholder what can be possible.
Yeah.
So it's not the kind of the full service element. Further down the line, we may have to look at bringing in partners or something like that with a bit more expertise on it to make it a fully kind of scalable service. But that's a bit beyond the scope of this project at the moment.
Just for that one as well, for the case study, it's a wind farm in Ireland, and they've got the approval, but the inspector had actually flagged that there is a significant risk of landslide, and they've ignored it. So there's actually, you can see a few spots where the wind farm is planned to be put, and there's a significant risk there, and you can see that from the ground motion service, but they are continuing ahead with it. So it's vital in that sense that people are made more aware of it, and they can easily have a look at something like that on a portal and be able to see how serious that is.
Okay. Manuel, no. I wanted to maybe end with you talked earlier about the sort of the gap internally between the technical side and the commercial side, and this is one of the barriers that needs to be overcome. And in our work, we've certainly found that there's a lot of dependence on individuals, and somebody who's enthusiastic and pushing the solution. But that's not enough. It's not always enough. So I wonder what other barriers you perceive or have found in talking with the companies in the sector.
I mean, I think the sort of the awareness is probably the biggest one that we encountered. There's I'm trying to think because it's been a little while since we spoke to people about the actual, the issues around using it.
I think you said that the awareness amongst the people that you contacted and were talking to was they were aware of EO solutions, but then they were presumably not in a position, either they didn't think they were going to solve the problem, or they were not in a position to introduce the technology into the company's processes.
Yeah. I mean, there was a bit of both of that. So yeah, either the product had some potential, but it wasn't at a sufficiently kind of advanced stage for them to be able to use it necessarily. And that's kind of part of the, I suppose, the gap. Like what are the products that, maybe with a little bit of tweaking, you could, then be integrated quite easily. And then, like sometimes it was just that they didn't have sufficient resources to kind of look into it in enough detail, or, having had a kind of a cursory look, they didn't think it was going to be useful, even if, improvements were made to it, or if there was, a higher resolution, it just wasn't really kind of going to be considered in the long run.
I think the temporal resolution was a big one as well. Like they want the data a lot more frequently than they can get with EO. And I think some of the products maybe are not designed with the wind sector in mind as well. Maybe because of that attitude that they have with EO, and they're like, we have our data and we're going to stick to that. So perhaps some of the EO products were designed with that in mind and saying, okay, well, they're not going to make use of this, so it's not really a benefit to them.
Yeah, I mean, as Conor was saying earlier, with the the use of LiDAR masts or meteorological masts, you can get information nearly every 10 between 10 minutes and every hour. And having 2 or 3 days between data collection just wasn't going to be feasible for them in terms of comparisons. So obviously with a LiDAR mast or MET mast, you've got it's very localized data to just one point, and it is it's costly. It costs a lot to put a floating LiDAR buoy out in the water, for example. So having the kind of overlap, and maybe being able to, in the long run, like being able to validate satellite data with meteorological data that's already been collected on site, that's the kind of the next step that might bring the EO data in.
Okay, so that would be one of the areas to address in sort of reducing the barriers to uptake.
Yeah,
I think a lot of what EO can do with the wind sector is assistance rather than cutting steps out. Like, especially in the planning, like it can't really cut steps out that have to be done so rigorously, but it can be used there as something that's very easy to access, and someone can just verify data, or validate something that they've looked at themselves.
Okay. So anything else you want to add? I think I've run out of questions for the moment.
No, just if anybody is interested, I think Conor's put the links in, but if you want to to know more about the project, or you want to have a chat with us, you can either we can put our emails in the chat, or you can just email research@techworks.ie. That will also work, but we can put our emails in. But we're always happy to have conversations with other other EO providers as well, just to try and understand people's other experiences, like what Manuel was saying there in the solar side of things. Like we've other kind of colleagues and partners who are doing some of the other best practice projects in different areas, and it's always interesting as well, just to compare notes.
I was going to add, I mean, I started out with OGO, the oil and gas activity, and of course, I guess there is quite a lot of read across in the offshore activities.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
even if the offshore oil and gas sometimes move its. I don't suppose that happens in the wind sector.
No, not generally.
Yeah, they're fairly firmly fixed into the bedrock, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a question for an email address. If you can put a link into the chat for anybody wishing to contact you, and we'll finish at that point. I'm not quite sure. There's another message in there from Emmanuel. Providing a link. Okay. So we'll thank you for joining us and explaining about the EO for Wind project and the wind energy sector. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. And well, thank you for your time. And at this point, we'll close the EOcafe. The next EOcafe is the 19th of June, looking at water management and innovation in the water management sector. So we'll keep that in your diary and join us in 2 weeks' time. Thank you for everybody, and anybody who's coming to Expand EO. See you next week.